Guys, today we have on Alex Gladstein, very well known in Bitcoin circles, been around for quite some time now, works for the HRF, and is somebody who I think, I followed for quite some time, and I think is doing really cool stuff with Bitcoin and comes at it from probably a different perspective than you're likely to get. So with that said, Alex, welcome. If you don't mind introducing yourself, and maybe just like a little bit of background.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Name's Alex. I've been working for a nonprofit called the Human Rights Foundation for almost 18 years now. We focus on helping people who live under authoritarian countries with civil liberties matters. So from the very beginning, I was, as a younger person, working on technology with regard to people living under totalitarian regimes. So this was like before Cuba had internet, helping get outside media into the country, and then helping get information in and out of North Korea. I spent a lot of my early career looking at how technology could empower people. A few years later, we really started to do digital security stuff. So thinking about how apps, like what Signal would later become, could really help in the day-to-day of activists, just making spying on them and messing with them just a little bit harder was very helpful, making them not like the lowest hanging fruit, teaching them how to use, good quality VPNs, things like that. I think we went through a decade where, like 2010, very, very few global activists used any kind of privacy technology. And then by 2020, Signal was just the standard essentially. So we went through a decade of adoption of that stuff that was very promising. We also work with organizations like Citizen Lab to basically test your phone. Like, do you have Pegasus on your phone? We do phone checks, which is pretty great and pretty useful, yeah. And people have it. I mean, these spyware sort of spear phishing apps are more prevalent than you'd think, especially among the human rights activist community. I don't know how prevalent they are among, let's say, public crypto holders, but certainly among political dissidents, this is something that governments absolutely use. They purchase from companies. And like Cellbrite, and then they use it on people. So we spent a lot of time working with activists to try and up their digital security game. And I started to understand the financial technology part of it early on, but I'm very skeptical. I took like a personality test, for example, and I'm going to be the most skeptical person in a room of 100, for example. And Julian Assange spoke at the second big conference that my organization put on in person. This was in 2010 in Norway. The Oslo Freedom Forum is the event we do, and he spoke there in person. And we were obviously following Julian afterwards. And a year later, in June 2011, he posted a Bitcoin address to the WikiLeaks Twitter account. And we noticed that. We were like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, that works. And but, so early. I think the next year, some of his colleagues came to my event, and they sold Bitcoin to buy tickets, probably 30, 40 Bitcoin to buy a ticket to our conference, something like that, super, super early. So everything was so much harder to digest as someone working for what is supposed to be just the sort of mainstream reputable organization. But Bitcoin kept forcing its way in. A couple of years later, some Ukrainian activists reached out to us, and they said, hey, this was right before Maidan Square. So, hey, Yanukovych, who was like the Putin puppet, like, hey, he froze our bank accounts. We have no way of receiving aid to do what we want to do here. Can you guys help? And we were open-minded about it, and we said, sure. So we helped them with a Bitcoin fundraiser. So this whole post is still on Reddit. It's kind of cool. And it says, nothing else can reach them is the headline. And that always stuck with me as like, what Bitcoin is for. When nothing else can reach, it goes, right? And I started to put the pieces together, but it probably wasn't until 2016, late 2016, we did a big event in San Francisco, and a couple people there were just like, listen, man, I gotta figure this out. And a few of my friends were really dedicated to penetrating my skepticism, and they like took me to lunch and introduced me to people. One of them was Bitstein, who ends up becoming like a major character on Bitcoin Twitter later on. But this was when Bitcoin was, $500-600. Andreas had gone on Rogan recently. And but it was definitely on the up. Like you could tell, like it was creeping up towards the end of that year. This was also the time, unfortunately, when we had the whole blockchain thing, which really distracted, I think, people from what Bitcoin can do for you in terms of being a tool for activists. Almost every single NGO that started to become interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, let's say in 2016, 17, almost all of them went for this like nonsense, like permissioned blockchain thing. It was really bad because then you're 3-4 years away from reconvincing your board to go back and look at it, right? So there was this huge permissioned blockchain tragedy thing that happened in 17, 18, where every single like humanitarian group that probably certainly could have benefited from Bitcoin at the time, they had a massive setback with blockchain stuff. But I kept staring at it, and I listened to a lot of Andreas's stuff, and I watched a lot of the block size wars happen. It's really amazing to actually be like a spectator for that, right? So I was super dialed in on it early 2017. We produced the first workshop for Bitcoin and human rights it was like April 2017, May 2017. And so Bitcoin broke $2,000 at our event. People were going nuts. And the whole time I'd been watching the whole block size war sort of play out on social media, following a who's who of all these characters. And I just thought it was so interesting. And I was watching so intently because I wanted to know what would happen. Would corporate interests and governments essentially win, or would the people win? And I was watching. And when I saw that the outcome was that the corporate interests lost, I was super interested. And I got much, much more interested in Bitcoin towards the end of 2017. Of course, the price, I'm sure, helped, but the fact that essentially that the big blockers lost was really interesting to me, because on paper they had all the numbers, right? So I was fascinated by that and decided to really try to go back to my team and ask them to do more. Now, again, at the time, it's like that was just ICO mania. Every single person was coming to us saying, "Hey, we have this coin. Do you guys want to work with us? We'll give you a donation." And you have to kind of touch the stove a little bit and burn yourself, because we don't know. We're human rights activists. Like, again, I didn't come at this from Wall Street or computer science. I came at it from a humanitarian background. So, of course, when someone's like, "Oh, Zcash is private money," I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome." Or like Filecoin, it's going to like decentralize storage on the internet. I'm really excited. I remember listening to the show in 2017, I think, with Naval and Tim Ferriss, and they're talking about these things. And I'm like, "Oh, this is so rad." Right. So, but I'm very naive, right? I don't know. So I'm not a coder. So it takes me a long time to work through all the bullshit and work through all the nonsense and figure out sort of what was actually happening there. I would say by early 2018, we as an organization decided we had accumulated some Bitcoin because people had been buying their tickets to our event for a couple of years. And it was actually an interesting point of conversation for our board. Like, what do we do with it? And I was kind of like, let's not sell it. Like, let's be careful with it. Let's use it. And they decided to spend it all and, sell it all. And at the time I was like, you know what? It's fine. We're not a hedge fund. We're a human rights group.
Yeah.
It's going to go to good action. I have no problem with that. But that's when I basically pitched the idea of sort of creating a longer term strategy, as we entered the bear market of like, hey, like, let's think 5-10 years out. Let's start thinking in Bitcoin. And we started to put together Bitcoin programming in a more robust way. Pandemic kind of was right in there as we were building it up. But coming out of the pandemic, 2021 in Miami, we couldn't do our event in Norway because of all the pandemic nonsense. So we ended up doing it in Miami, and we had a full scale Bitcoin Academy. It was so fun with a lot of well-known people. We had Elizabeth Stark, Nick Carter, Peter McCormick, many great developers and educators. And it was interesting. Like, I got a big pushback from a lot of people who attend our event that why was it Bitcoin? Why not crypto? For me, the word choice is really important, but it was not easy. I mean, people really wanted us to do crypto, right? They really, really wanted us to do crypto, and they felt like that the Bitcoin thing was discriminating or something like that. But I just kept pushing Bitcoin. I just thought it was the signal. And certainly there's some crypto projects that are interesting, but generally speaking, most of them I just thought, especially at the time, were just total nonsense. So let's just stick with Bitcoin. And it's worked out so well for us. It's helped us avoid so many potholes and problems and kind of like traps. And we just kept building critical capacity in this area to the point where in 2020, we launched a fund. So now we have a Bitcoin Development Fund. We give away about $1 million in Bitcoin per quarter to open source projects around the world, either doing educational work in dictatorships on Bitcoin, or doing community work, building communities, or building the tools themselves. So tons of software development, both at the core layer, Lightning, and the app layer, and starting to get into like more experimental areas too. So, today we have a fully fledged, we call it a financial freedom team now. I've tried to be smart about, because Bitcoin again is pretty exclusionary, right? In terms of most people interested in crypto is a much larger pool than the number of people interested in Bitcoin, right? So trying to be smart about it. We thought financial freedom was the right branding because that's really what we're trying to do here. And we focus on Bitcoin and some other complementary technologies with that fund and that program. But it has like 8 full-time people. We have a weekly newsletter that I think really kicks ass that shows financial repression around the world and shows how people are fighting back. We do tons of different events around the world. And man, it's such an exciting time to be alive. And it's so incredible to see what the global human rights activist movement has been able to do with Bitcoin. And it's becoming like their currency. Just whether you work in Russia or the Middle East or in Latin America, like this is the currency of activists. They're really starting to understand that this is money that dictators can't stop. And that's the tagline for our program, basically. So that's the story arc of how this all came to be. And, I have to just credit Bitcoin and the focus on it for helping us get here. If it had been a crypto program, there's just zero chance we would have the same focus, integrity, or impact.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was a fantastic rundown. I feel like you nailed a lot of follow-up questions, but so like help me understand a little bit. I know you, and then I also know the HRF through you. So my introduction to the Human Rights Foundation was through Bitcoin, and I know that you guys put on the Oslo Freedom Forum. Do you spend all of your time on Bitcoin exclusively? I mean, I understand there's crossover here, but is that primarily what the HRF focuses on, or just you at this juncture?
So at the beginning, it was just me, and I have to credit my colleagues for enabling me to do it. And I credit where they came from. So our president is Lebanese, our founder is Venezuelan, and our chairman was, and then that still is, Russian. So they all saw money be weaponized by the government, and they all saw money be an attack vector on people. So I think they were willing to give me a little more benefit of the doubt. If HRF had been run by like 3 people from Chicago, there's zero chance I would have been allowed to do this, right? Financial privilege just blinds you. So we are a nonprofit that focuses on the problem of authoritarianism globally. And our team really defines that pretty narrowly. So there's about 95 countries we focus on. But at the same time, it's kind of broad. It's 5.7 billion people who we deem as living under essentially not one-party states, but pretty close, essentially, with plenty of one-party states involved, where people just don't have the same accountability mechanisms that they do in free societies. And, look, I'm someone who is a big critic of a lot of democracies. I wrote a whole book about how evil the IMF and World Bank are, for example. But I think there's something really important in doing activism in a free society versus a closed society. Basically, look at the United States with all of our problems. There's like tens of thousands of nonprofits that operate outside the government. You can make fun of the government for a living on television. You can sue the government for a living as an activist to get, sensitive information. I understand there's been a lot of victims along the way, but generally speaking, these are things that people in most countries can't ever dream of, right? So there's a big difference. And what happens is structurally, philanthropy goes all into the free countries. And the reason why is very clear when you think about it. Philanthropists who get rich in America or Europe or Japan or whatever, or even Israel, they're allowed to pump the money back into their own country and to do human rights work in their country or their area where they grew up, right? Meaning there's not going to be like a reprisal on their family. right? If you're in Hong Kong or Saudi Arabia or Iran or Russia and you're wealthy, you're a billionaire or whatever, you can't fund the opposition. Like your entire family will get arrested. And that's what's happened. So what's happened is a structural deficit where if you look at human rights world, let's say, every year there's about $1 billion of spending. We'll just call it that. It's roughly something like that. More than 90% of it gets spent inside countries that are already pretty free, like let's say liberal democracy. It gets respent in the 10% of the world that's the most free. And you have the other 90% of the world fighting for scraps, to the point where, like, for a Chinese human rights group, a $10,000 grant is like a huge deal. There's just so little money being spent on human rights inside dictatorships. So I think our mission is really important because it addresses that deficit. And at the worst case, we're just super complementary to everyone else, because at the end of the day, most of the other groups in the space, have a kind of a bigger focus on the US or Europe, etc., and less of a focus on Chad, or Bangladesh, or a country like West Papua or something like that.
The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs, who I've known for a few years now. They're one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. Ellipsis Labs is a small engineering team with a flat structure. They build complex systems, primarily in Rust. For engineers who like challenges, here's the kind of problem they solve. A layer 2 blockchain needs to maintain 100 million accounts and generate a state root after each transaction batch. The root must be built within 50 milliseconds. How would you design the system to ensure the root construction is fast enough? High-performance challenges are core to Ellipsis Labs' mission as they build modern crypto finance. They believe finance needs more than an upgrade. It needs a complete rewrite. The success of their first product, Phoenix V1, speaks for itself, doing over $70 billion in organic trading volume. Now Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. I like them because they're unique in this space. They have a long-term focus, they work in person from their New York City headquarters, and they're here to build products that fundamentally change the world of finance. If you want to learn more about their open roles, go to ellipsislabs.xyz/careers. What are you focused on right now? Like, what are some of the things you're working on recently? And yeah, obviously, like how that relates to Bitcoin and freedom technology and so on. But like, maybe in the past year or so, like what have you been working on specifically to give the audience a better understanding of like what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Again, me day to day. So I kind of have three hats I wear at HRF. I'm in charge of fundraising. I'm in charge of marketing, and I'm in charge of what I've grown to be the financial freedom team. Where again, we have a full team of 8 people who work full time on Bitcoin stuff globally. I support the rest of my organization. I help market what they do, and I help raise money for what they do. And they are focused on, again, authoritarian regimes. So, high interest would be transitions, but also, ongoing highlights of repression. So Syria is really interesting to us right now, as a country that went from having this insane dictator to, not a dictator, to a government that seems to be somewhat meritocratic, somewhat democratic, somewhat open, somewhat progressive, is fascinating to us, obviously. So transitions like that are things that we look at. And, big picture, we also will look at, what is Russia doing? What is China doing? Sadly, now, what is India doing? So there is a bit of a geopolitical look that what we have, but our work is really grassroots. I mean, that's what we spend our time doing, is supporting individuals on the ground in these countries. How can we help them? So our programs are really designed to help individuals. We believe individuals change history, and that's what we focus on. So, for example, our conference is based on individual talks on a stage by people doing amazing things that then you can connect with during the coffee breaks or whatever. We have fellowship programs that aim to give these activists who usually have no opportunities and no money and no funding, the same level of attention that a Silicon Valley CEO would get in terms of life management, diet stuff, meditation, psychedelics, trauma experiences, how to defeat trauma, how to fundraise, how to market, all these things. So we have fellowship programs that really try to bring them up to the next level. We do some grants and some micro grant activity to help them out with different projects. And we really try to connect them and get their story out through our network of people who want to help them. So we're kind of like a vessel for people in the world from different industries who want to get involved in the fight against tyranny. And, the way that I feel I can be most effective at that beyond any work I do at HRF is Bitcoin. I mean, I think that Bitcoin is out there helping people under dictatorships today where no alphabet soup organization is able to do it, right? Well, whether it's, Sudan, or Gaza or Burma or so many other forgotten places that aren't even covered in the media. You have places where, Red Cross can't get in because of reason X, or, it's too repressive, so nobody can get in, like North Korea or whatever. But like the point is, in all of these cases, Bitcoin finds a way in, and it can be used by anybody. I mean, Iran is such a good example. It's very hard to work in Iran as a nonprofit abroad. There are all these rules or sanctions. It's very difficult. But Iran has a thriving Bitcoin community, and people are using Bitcoin at a high level there. And in fact, one of the people I've learned from is a guy named Zia Sadr, who's an Iranian Bitcoiner, who's a developer. He was very focused on promoting Samurai and promoting Whirlpool actually inside Iran, because it's very important there. And he was actually detained and like disappeared during the women life freedom protests a couple of years ago. So we didn't know where he was. Like, it was crazy. And then, he got let out, and now he's back to doing what he does. But pretty amazing guy. I was actually able to go on the show a few days ago, which was pretty cool. But here's somebody who's inside an authoritarian regime, translating works into important, usable both theory and practice works about Bitcoin for an audience that really needs it. Like, their currency has completely collapsed, hyperinflated. They're usually pretty cut off from the international financial system, and bank accounts are intensely monitored to the point of where they now have AI. And if you're a woman in Iran walking around in a city and you don't have your hijab on correctly, you get like auto fined. So everything is like set up and automated based on stuff they bought from China. So in that world, Bitcoin is a real lifesaver. And I've met a lot of people who've been able to get out of Iran because of Bitcoin, or who can keep doing what they're doing because of it. So I just get inspired by how it helps in places where, again, nothing else can reach.
Yeah. When you talk about, sort of your advocacy for Bitcoin, just help me understand, do you primarily view it as, okay, the ability to, send some Chinese, human rights activists $10,000 in a, censorship resistant way, or, and not that these aren't complementary in a sense, but, or are you more thinking of it in, can we start circular economies on the ground that primarily use Bitcoin? And yeah, you could just run with it. But like, when you think of it, like, how would you explain that?
I would say it's like an ideological stack, right? It's not just sending money from A to B without paperwork is part of it. That's obviously wonderful, but stablecoins do that.
Right.
I would say it's like, so stablecoins have really big humanitarian utility, right? Because they can give dollar access to people who don't have dollars around the world with no paperwork. Really cool. But I would say that's a utility. That's a technological improvement. If we live in a dollar world, I think it's only fair that everybody have access to dollars. I think so. But, to me and a lot of people who are in the Bitcoin space, like a lot of the reason the world's so screwed up because of the dollar system. And it's because of essentially the dollar hegemonic system and the way that 4% of the world's population get to make the rules for everybody else is part of the problem. So the idea of just sort of extending the current system through, essentially these tokens that don't require KYC, that is the value prop for stablecoins. Like, if stablecoins required like a face scan, they would lose massive amounts of their value. I mean, not all of their value, but they would immediately become completely useless for like the entire, I like to use the word global majority, like meaning what used to be called global south or third world, but like basically the place where most of the world's people and most of the world's resources and labor are, right, is the global majority. So it would immediately become basically useless for them. They would be shut out like they are with every other thing. Fiat economists are always like, well, we understand the dollar's been evaporating, but as long as you've invested in the stock market, you've been fine. Well, it's like, guess what? Like, most of the people in the world cannot invest in the US stock market. They don't have access to NVIDIA or Apple. Their way of saving is in sheet metal or cattle is the case for most people in the world. Like, you're either saving in sheet metal, cattle, or these stacks of totally worthless paper money. There was a story the other day of people in Malawi right now are saving in goats. So it's like, we're talking about a technology upgrade, a savings technology upgrade from goats to Bitcoin. I mean, imagine having to like fucking sell your goat. Like, it's just the whole hassle and process. And obviously it can't teleport, and it could it could get hit by a car. Like, there's all these different things. So all these people now And I went to Malawi and I met a bunch of Malawian Bitcoiners who had read one of my books. So crazy. But this is all happening around the world in an unstoppable way. It's just every day more and more people learn about Bitcoin and want to get involved in it. And for me, yeah, it's not just the payment efficiency part. I mean, again, that's a big part of it, but like any crypto can pretty much do that, right? Like it's more about the network and the ability to redeem and go off and on ramp is growing at such a crazy rate. Like when we started doing this, it was pretty hard to do, Bitcoin exchange into fiat currency. But today it's just like, ATMs are a lot more popular than people think they are. They're like everywhere in a lot of the world. You can do up to like €1,000 a day, no KYC in so many countries through ATMs. But if not that, there's these services like BitRefill and Machankura and Azteco, where like in vast swaths of the world, you can just live on Bitcoin. And whether with BitRefill, you can buy your mobile phone minutes or your gasoline for your car or any technology you want or anything on the internet. Or with Azteco, you can just walk into a store and just walk out with cash just from a Bitcoin voucher. We're talking like large parts of the world now where they're big countries where you can just live on Bitcoin. And whether you use services like that or in Kenya, Costa Rica, and now Brazil, there's like these neat little on-off ramp tricks where you can just live on Bitcoin and you can pay any merchant through a QR code and they receive local currency, but you can just spend your Bitcoin wherever you want on the country's dominant mobile money thing. So we're trying to build a global P2P marketplace where people are completely liberated from the current system. I mean, that's really what human rights activists need. They need to be able to earn their income in Bitcoin, save it securely, maybe set up a multi-sig for a nonprofit that where the key holders are in different jurisdictions. They need to be able to buy stuff they need in it, and they need to be able to buy services and ideally pay for stuff without needing to go and do an exchange. Like that's the end goal. That's what we're trying to get to, is just Bitcoin native lives for a lot of people, because it can remove so many of the points of repression for these folks.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to have to come back and press you on stablecoins now. We have to make this not look too biased. One of the very strong arguments, especially early on with Bitcoin, was that it was, the only really easy way to transmit money across the world. And it was, especially at the time, relatively low cost. It was used as a medium of exchange, Silk Road, all of these, initial understandings of Bitcoin, which to be clear still exist, but in many ways, stablecoins have supplanted one of the obvious value propositions, right? And I'm curious, you go to Malawi, how do you sell somebody, or maybe even a more poignant question, should we be, right, the collective first world who may have the privilege to save in Bitcoin, should we be trying to sell somebody on saving, earning in Bitcoin when they're subject to a high degree of volatility, and for now they can transmit dollars on USDT on Tron at relatively low cost, and at least they're not being subjected to some hyperinflationary local currency? Like, what is your selling point, or are they symbiotic? So like a lot of people say, Nick Carter would say, a lot of Bitcoin activists would say these are symbiotic. This is this is part of the onboarding process.
Sure.
Yeah, run with it.
Well, first of all, I don't do the whole Roger Ver thing where I go to some place and try to convince people to use Bitcoin.
Okay.
I don't think that's very smart, and it doesn't lead anywhere. And it usually leads to a whole bunch of people with Bitcoin where they lose their key and they don't know what's happening. I have been to many places where stablecoins are front and center. I just spent some time in Buenos Aires a few months ago, and I went to exchange some Bitcoin for cash, and we get to this currency exchange place, and the lady's like, well, Monday, Wednesday, Friday we do Bitcoin, and Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday we do Tron. So it's sorry, you're on Tron day. So it's great. So I was able to use Aqua Wallet to swap my Bitcoin into USD Tron, which was really neat. Great tool. I mean, could still use some improvement, but really neat there. So I was able to send my Bitcoin to this person's Tether on Tron address, and get some cash. I mean, that was interesting, but I mean, it shows you how prevalent it is. So many places, Tether on Tron is just completely dominant. You're absolutely correct. But like, to me, that might be a slight improvement on the current system. I think, like, especially for the people I'm working with, it is, because it's permissionless for the most part. I would actually retract that. It's partially permissionless. It can obviously still be frozen and censored, etc. But you don't need KYC to use it, and that's quite valuable. And like I said at the outset of this conversation, stablecoins are a very effective humanitarian tool. Anyone denying that is just, not really in touch with reality. I guess the question is, what are you trying to advance, right? So stablecoins in many ways entrench the current system. I think they lead to potentially like more demand for US debt. I think they do expand the dollar network effect. They extend and entrench the current system. I think the way I like to approach it is the way we approach it in our education, where we do Bitcoin education. And at the end of the course, if we address people's concerns, and they obviously have volatility concerns, things like that, and we show them how to exchange Bitcoin into Tether without KYC. And there's a bunch of really easy, cool ways you can do that. Little amounts at a time. Don't risk anything too big. But you can just go to Sideshift and just freaking do it. It just works. It's worked for many years. Now, one day it won't work, but the people who run that website have every incentive to keep it working because they make a ton of money off of it, right? So for people doing especially smaller amounts of transactions, usually all under 10K, the idea of just like living in Bitcoin, and then whenever you need to just go to Sideshift, and plus it's got like privacy benefits too, right? You're swapping basically. So I just don't see it as really an obstacle right now. People who need the stablecoins will get them. I will say that like what's been really interesting is 3-4 years ago, everybody wanted stablecoins. So for example, we started doing these grants, and we ask, do you want Bitcoin or dollars, right? And we started doing this 3, 4, 5 years ago. Maybe in like 2019, 2020, people in Russia, people in Belarus, we were starting to do this work, and they were like, we want stable coins. We're like, ugh. So we had to like figure it out how to do that, because people don't donate stable coins to us. Like, people donate Bitcoin to us. So it's okay. What are we going to do here? I will say that's changed. We in the global activist movement, we receive very little requests for stable coins. And I don't know whether that's because there's been more censorship, more blacklisting, or whether it's just they're harder to use. I mean, I think people forget, like, they're dollars, so they have certain attributes that are attractive, but they're not like compatible unless you have a broker. Like they're on like all these different chains, and they're not exactly easy to use together. You have the different ecosystems, Solana, you have Tron, you have Ethereum. Like sometimes they don't really work that well together. All of you listening know this. Like, so I don't know why I don't know what the reason is. But we are just getting much more. People just want Bitcoin, at least in this particular community. And I do think that in the same way that, like, the global activist movement really drove Twitter. It helped Twitter become a place for global ideas back in the day. Like, the Arab Spring really is what lit it on fire and made it a thing. Like, even before celebrities and sports and politics, like, it was the activists, right? And I think you could say the same thing in some ways for Signal and for privacy technology that's now like totally mainstream. Man, I think activists and people, political dissidents and reporters, like investigative journalists, I think they're going to be the ones who push Bitcoin over the edge too, eventually. And something we need to address at some point, Nostr as well. But we can get to that later. But the point is, I think every technology needs a hardcore ideological group that is diehard about something, that pushes it into the mainstream, and then it flows from there, right? Yeah. And I think you've seen that with almost every major like positive technology since the internet started. And I really feel strongly that the human rights activists are going to take this and run with it, because they need it. Like, a lot of people I work with or meet don't ideologically relate to Bitcoin. They don't care about hard money or like a supply cap or Austrian economics. They don't even know what that is. What they know is that this is something where nobody can inflate it, nobody can devalue it, nobody can stop it, and I can be my own bank. That's fucking awesome. They really like that. They don't care about the ideological stuff. They don't have to read an essay by Hayek or by Rothbard or whatever. That's not happening. None of these people have ever heard of Rothbard. Like, it's irrelevant to their lived experience of Bitcoin. They use it because it works. And, a lot of these people are leftist people or progressive people or even communists. I've interviewed a whole bunch of communists in Cuba who love Bitcoin because they think it's going to, bring down the dollar or whatever. So it's kind of like a mirror. It's whatever you see, it is like Bitcoin in many ways. But there's so many different kinds of users around the world is my point. And, what you see on social media is not very representative of that. A lot of the people who use Bitcoin would never even think of joining a group to chat about it. It's just like a thing they use to move money from little Tehran and Toronto into Iran because it just works better. So I don't know. I think a lot of it is this quiet revolution that's happening very slowly. But hey, all the big news helps. I mean, I'm not one of these people who's like, I mean, my life is not here to dedicate to like enrich BlackRock. But my point is that that's all inevitably going to happen along the way. Like, if you're going to take Bitcoin from pre-Silk Road era, faucet era Bitcoin to $2 trillion Bitcoin, well, guess what? Like, all the big bad actors are going to adopt it along the way. And then we're going to go another similar distance from where we are today or where we are in 10 years. And it's like, guess what? Yeah, like every single financial institution and government is going to adopt Bitcoin along the way. Like, that is what we're in fact counting on, because then it makes it impossible to kill or ban. So it's been interesting to watch all the adoption stuff happen, starting kind of with El Salvador a few years ago. And then kind of moving forward to now is like, this is what was going to happen. There's a great essay written by my friend Alan Farrington called Wittgenstein's Money about like, it makes you stop and ask like, well, what would it look like if it did look like this money went from zero to like, whatever, world reserve currency? Well, it would look a lot like what's happened with Bitcoin, right? So, I'm of mixed feelings, of course, about a lot of the adoption stuff, but we're not going to live in this world where we get cool, like neutral, open, freedom money for everybody, and everybody accepts it, and like the banks don't have any. Like, no, that's not going to happen. Let's be real. Like, the government doesn't have any. No, that's not going to happen. So I think you just need to recognize that these like big bad adoption moments are part of the evolution of the thing. Like, it's just what's going to happen. So it's been interesting to watch. But look, we remain day to day laser focused on helping human rights activists use it. And they don't ask the same questions. Like, if it's like my friend I'm having brunch with in America, they're going to be like, oh, Bitcoin. I don't know. I heard it's like bad for the environment or bad. It's good for criminals or whatever. But when I talk to a dissident from an authoritarian regime and I tell them that, hey, have you heard of this thing? It's like money governments can't control. They're just immediately interested. Tell me more. I'd love to learn more. How do I use it? How does it work? So again, the financial privilege piece is pretty important there.
Yeah. Okay. I want to come back to, you mentioned privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin privacy currently, well, it's pseudonymous. There's ways to make Bitcoin more private. People push Lightning. Where are we on this path? Right. I think this is another. Mm-hmm. I'm steel manning other sides. I don't know how if I'm steel manning hard enough. Right. I don't know if I should be more caustic, but I think it's a reasonable question. Right. Like, and there are and to this point, there are other currencies, Monero being one, Zcash. These don't have the privacy set of Bitcoin. Interestingly enough, like we saw last week, North Korea is putting a lot of their stolen Bybit hack into Bitcoin. And the reason for this, and the reason this happens every time, is because there's a massive privacy set. Now, not to say we condone that behavior, but there is validity to that point. But in terms of practical privacy for individuals, Lightning's kind of cumbersome. The way to do that in a private manner is a little tricky. Like, where do you view that? And also, I mean, is this, in your mind, is this something that we really need to get right and get right soon?
Well, I think what's really interesting about Bitcoin privacy is it's on a spectrum in terms of size of transaction, right? So the people I'm working with are not trying to launder $1 trillion or to move $1 billion or to even move $10 million. Yeah. They're trying to move $50 or $300 or even $1,000. And Bitcoin's just really good at that level for privacy.
For sure.
Like really good. Like first of all, the thing we teach at the beginning of all our classes is no KYC ever. Never KYC. Never KYC anything. If you're never KYC, well, they can't because it puts your name and phone number into a database that your government can look at and come and arrest you. Like the very reason why Bitcoin makes a lot of sense as a donation tool for nonprofits is when we give to somebody in Egypt, that person has to file the same paperwork for Uncle Sam as they would whether they get Home Depot stock, euros, dollars, Bitcoin, doesn't matter. So on our side, we're accounting for it fully. But on their side, if they get a bank wire from us, it has to say inside of it, Human Rights Foundation. They're going to get arrested, or at least detained and questioned. If they get Bitcoin from us, the government has no freaking idea. They open up a fresh wallet, they accept the Bitcoin. Now, the question is, what do they do with it from there, and how can they avoid KYC? And, that's why we teach, no KYC exchanges, everything's got to be no KYC. And there's just so many cool tools available now. And more importantly, communities and groups where you can do, if not like a cash transaction in person, you can just do, there's all kinds of bots. Like in Ukraine, there's this bot called Alice Bob, where it just goes directly from the local currency to Bitcoin, like up to like $5,000-$6,000, and it just works instantly with no KYC. So there's so many localized solutions. It's almost like each country needs its own little roadmap. And if you're like, well, I just got paid or I just got a grant in Bitcoin, what do I do with it? Well, it depends. If you're in South Africa, guess what? You're in luck. You can pretty much spend it in any store in the country. If you're in Moldova, I don't know, maybe there's only a couple ATMs. So it just depends on where you are, right? Ironically, some of the richest countries are some of the hardest to spend the Bitcoin in, like no KYC. It's kind of funny.
Makes sense.
But it makes sense. But it's in a lot of the countries we work in, it's like pretty trivial to spend your Bitcoin. So I would just say that on the privacy front, we care about it greatly. We invest a lot of it. Our very first grant out of our fund was for CoinSwap, something Chris Belcher was working on, which is like a really clever kind of PageJoin-esque thing where it's sort of like if enough people are doing it, chain analysis becomes impossible. Yeah. We are very, very supportive of collaborative transactions, pools, all kinds of second layer ideas. All of them help with privacy in some way. I mean, we've been very, very supportive of Lightning. It's starting to get to the point where it's really great. If you really want to get into it with someone, go argue with this guy, Super Testnet, about Lightning privacy. I mean, he's really been going after it in a way that I just cannot do.
Yeah, he really does not believe. Yeah, I know. He's really fixated on proving that Lightning is better than Monero, which, I don't know.
Well, look, I've been down that road, and practically speaking, if you never attach your identity to something, it is very freaking hard to figure out who you are. So I think a lot of it comes from this idea of like, okay, I'm on Cash App or Binance, and then I move my Bitcoin here. And, but what if you've never attached it in the first place to your real world identity? And then it's a very powerful privacy tool. So it just sort of depends on your perspective. I mean, look, that's why we're like no KYC essentially, is very important in training for people living under dictatorships, obviously. Don't ever do that. And then from there, there's a bunch of different things. Like address for use was a big one back in the day. BTC Pay Server solved that, and that's a huge help. That really helps. Now it's not the be all end all, but it definitely helps. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do now, like bolts. A lot of people listening probably have never used it. No, not Bolt 12. There's a non-custodial exchange that can't rug you called Bolts, where you can swap your on-chain to Lightning or to Liquid or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Guess what? It's a swap. Like you're completely destroying the chain history. So there's so many neat little non-custodial tools you can use now. I mean, Bitcoin privacy is not, I think where we want it to be. It may never be there, but I'm so much more bullish on it than I was 5 years ago. I mean, it's way better today. I mean, there's some incredible Bitcoin privacy mobile wallet tools. Now, when it comes to like where I think we're going here, we'll see, but I'm a huge fan of ecash. And I think this largely solves a lot of these problems where it's like you really need to be private with a particular transaction or a small amount or a movement. Well, you go and use ecash, and that's the most private digital asset in the world is ecash. It's almost completely untraceable. It doesn't even have a blockchain. And the interplay between Bitcoin and ecash is so cool. I mean, you can just go to Boardwalk Cash. Here's the URL. So if you just go to Boardwalk Cash, you can just make an ecash wallet and you can send some Bitcoin to it. And now you have freaking fully anonymous ecash, and it pays into Bitcoin. So if you just think about what I just said, why would you ever use Monero? It makes no freaking sense unless you think like the value of the floating token is going to go up. This is better privacy technology and it's way easier to use. You don't need a wallet. You don't need anything. This is all in a progressive web app, just Boardwalk Cash. And what people are starting to realize is that Lightning is going to be the central nervous system for all these different things. You're going to have ARC pools. You're going to have ecash pools and mints. You're going to have space. You're going to have side chains. You're going to have things like Liquid. You're going to have all these different kind of trade-offs you can make as a Bitcoin user to go into something that gives you a little bit more, right? A little bit more something, a little bit more, a little bit cheaper, a little bit faster, a little bit more private, whatever it is. You're going to make that little trade-off, and you're going to trade off security for that. But the number of options that I'm seeing flower and blossom today is just very exciting. So I'm keenly aware, obviously, of the risks people take and how we need to deal with Bitcoin privacy, but I've just never been more bullish on it.
Yeah. Okay. You were talking about ecash, Lightning, ARC. Mm-hmm. There's also been, a lot of discussion, especially in the past year or two, about scaling and improving Bitcoin for scaling purposes. I know you take, mostly what I've gleaned from your Twitter, you're pretty ardent Bitcoin maxi, I would say. And I think that from what I can tell, and it makes sense, right? You want Bitcoin to preserve all of the properties that you value it for and the people you work with value it for. So any, dramatic change, I would say, and you're probably going to look at that with some degree of skepticism or concern. I don't know if the HRF takes any development views, but have you been following the sort of, I'm sure you have, the debate on, upgrades, opcodes. Does any of this interest you? Are you against anything in particular? I'm kind of curious, this new Bitcoin season 2, I guess. That's what are your thoughts on this? And maybe more importantly, with regards to what you do, I'm getting a different angle here. I'm not talking to Udi and Eric. I can talk to them when I want, right? I'm talking to human rights activists right now. Where do you kind of fall on the spectrum?
Well, to your point, look, there's an interesting maxim. I would encourage people to think about it. I think it's from my friend Ben Sessions. I'm not sure where it originally was credited. But if fiat money is where government prints the money and crypto is where anybody can print money, Bitcoin is where nobody can print money. That's just the way I think about it. And, I know a lot of libertarians are really into crypto because they're like Milei. He's a great freaking example, the president of Argentina. He doesn't understand Bitcoin at all. I can guarantee you this because I've spoken with his advisors and I was down there, and he loves anything that the state doesn't control. So he just, to him, anything that's private money, he loves. So I would say Bitcoiners occupy this interesting space where it's not, we're clearly not fully libertarian, because libertarians would be all for the free market and just go for everything, right? There's a little bit of a progressive streak to Bitcoiners where we're like, no, nobody should be able to print money, right? It's just sort of an interesting third space that we occupy. But to your point, when it comes to the evolution of Bitcoin, I'm very open-minded. I don't think ossification is ridiculous. Bitcoin's not going to ossify. It's always changing. I think the question is just when it changes, how it changes. I don't really think it's HRF's role to push for any upgrades. I see a lot of promising stuff. We're going to be here to support research. We supported roll-up research years ago with John Light. I think it's an awesome resource.
I've read a lot of his stuff. Yeah,
but that was something we did a few years ago. Our new one that's coming out shortly is about something that would require a fork, and it would be called cross-input signature aggregation. We really are entranced by this idea because it creates an incentive for Bitcoin users to want to collaboratively transact to save sats, to save money. But in process, they are creating these pools which create really good privacy, basically Bitcoin joins. And I think it would create an incentive mechanism where it's like Coinbase or Binance or whatever. If this gets upgrade, if we get an upgrade, a CISA or whatever you want to call it, SIGAG, if we get this upgrade in the future, you're going to be living in a world where it's like, well, if you're Binance or you're Coinbase, when you go to let's say clean up your UTXOs or whatever you're doing, you are going to do it in a way that is most cost effective because you're a business and you're profit seeking, right? And that is going to be to do a large collaborative transaction that is going to give badass privacy to anybody in that pool, right? So when you go to a court or a judge or whatever, and they're like, well, why did you do a collaborative transaction? You're going to be like, what are you talking about? Because we are a business and we have to save as much money as possible for our users. So in the same way that Lightning, interestingly, I thought, going back many years when it was first introduced, had similar incentive where it's like, well, exchanges, and there's been actually really big adoption of Lightning on exchanges. You guys should look at the River report from the last couple of years that just came out, I think yesterday. Sam Looters put it out. But, those exchanges are not adopting Lightning for any privacy benefits. That's not what's happening. They're adopting it because of other reasons. But you get this interesting incentive alignment. And that's where I think Bitcoin wins, is with incentive alignments. So if I were to support, in theory, like me personally, I really love the idea of stuff like CISA, where you get an incentive alignment between whether it be security or scaling and privacy. But we'll see. I mean, I'm also kind of of the view that Bitcoin's kind of like an organism. It grows. It reaches a point where it needs to kind of step change, burst through. And it kind of just will evolve. I'm not terribly afraid of this ossification thing, like BlackRock and U.S. government are going to control Bitcoin, therefore we can't upgrade it. I just, I don't know. And maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I just don't really believe in any of that stuff. I think when it's ready, Bitcoin will upgrade to meet the needs of its user base.
What are your concerns, to the extent that you have any? Like what are your big concerns?
Sure. I mean, well, my biggest concern is the education. I think the massive scaling problem for Bitcoin is not technical, it's education, it's people. The overwhelming virtual majority of the world, whatever it is, I mean, who knows, 95, 96, 97% of the world, like, doesn't use Bitcoin, doesn't know what Bitcoin is. This is a huge problem. So the biggest, most urgent thing is Bitcoin education. That is what we spend a lot of time on. And I think in 10 years, it's going to be the thing we all most regret, regardless of whatever crypto token we're involved in now. Like, and 3 years ago, I had this conversation with Udi and with Kobe on Peter's show. And I went on there, we talked about this, and I was like, well, what about in 10 years? And they're all like, yeah, of course, Bitcoin, right? So if we take a long-term view, I think we're all going to be regretful we didn't do more with Bitcoin than we could have now, like at this time, like sub $100,000 Bitcoin. It's like, I think in 10 years is going to be a crazy idea. And, we didn't share it enough. We didn't tell loved ones enough. We didn't tell communities enough. We didn't help organizations that we respect and care for figure out a way to build a Bitcoin treasury. We didn't teach enough people about it who were willing to listen, right? I think that's going to be one of the biggest regrets of anybody in the space. And you don't have to live in that world. Like, you can be an advocate today, and you can get out there and help people who are interested in helping. And to that point, I think, so I guess one of my fears is just we're not reaching enough people. But the second fear is like, okay, is Bitcoin going to be freedom money in 100 years for everybody? Or is it just going to be freedom money for nation states and massive corporations and rich people? So this is kind of where the scaling thing comes in. Like, is there going to be an ability to trustlessly use Bitcoin if you have no savings? Like, assuming the world structurally doesn't change that much over the next century, you're going to have a lot of haves and a lot of have-nots. Like, let's say you're someone who has very little income, you're like basically living week to week or day to day. Like the overwhelming majority of the world lives this way, by the way. Let's say you don't have enough money to pay for like a full on-chain fee, which I imagine in 100 years or even in 50 years is going to be like many, many months of minimum wage labor to pay for one transaction fee. So look, you can always receive Bitcoin for free, which is a really nice, benefit of the protocol, right? You can always just receive it. Now it might be like a call collect thing where they're like, no, you got to pay me some, but whatever. The point is, it's always free to receive. So let's say you've earned some wages in Bitcoin. Great. Well, how are you going to spend them? I think there's so many different ways to tackle that, but I think it's my biggest fear. But, maybe it's going to be private key sharing. I'm very interested in that. Like, moving ownership of Bitcoin without moving it on chain, I think is a fascinating thing. And that's why things like ARC are very interesting to me, where you can, even without a soft fork, non-trivially improve that sort of thing. I would hate for it to be a world where we kind of have like ecash type derivatives of BTC that are completely custodial, whether it be federated or single party. Yeah. And that's what like 90% of the world uses, and they have no access to the real deal. That would be a big disappointment. I still think it's positive because we've probably by that point killed central banking and a whole bunch of other things. But if most of the world can't use Bitcoin as freedom money, then I think we've failed in many ways. So I think those are my two big fears. Like, we're not educating people fast enough about Bitcoin, to which I would blame like a lot of the crypto scam stuff in a big way, like has to be defeated, or at least we have to educate people so they can tell the difference. And then the second thing being, that it develops in a way where people without a lot of money can't have this, don't have the same access as a rich person, if that makes sense.
You've been, I've noticed, quite strong at times about crypto. I mean, that's why earlier, I said you're a fairly ardent Bitcoin maxi. I think that probably a good number of my listeners are crypto people. When you say defeat the crypto, I don't know.
I said crypto scam. I mean, I said crypto scams.
Okay, crypto scams. What do you see? Like, what do you see a value within crypto? Stablecoins are one, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, what does anything interest you? And then, what are your kind of like pain points?
Well, I'm also not someone who wants government regulation. I think the only way to actually address the issue of people getting scammed, and I mean, your listeners should be this is what's happening now with all these meme coins. Like, maybe it was less obvious. The funny thing is the 2017-18 era was like, at least there was like a justification. They're like, this chain's going to do this thing that this other chain can't do. And now it's just like a straight fucking rug, right? Yeah. So we've gotten to this weird point where it's like we're going backwards in terms of morals. But I don't know, maybe it's better now. Maybe it's just like more clear what's happening. But I think that the only way you can really defeat rugs and scams is through education. That's my ardent belief. I don't believe in government action. And I don't believe that like altcoins or whatever, or tokens or meme coins or NFT, like they're never going to go away because people are always going to want to be able to really collaborate and create stuff. I don't think that's a problem. I think the problem is in people properly valuing and understanding Bitcoin and being able to differentiate that from the rest. And actually, I think a lot of the well-known people on crypto Twitter understand this. They just don't say it all the time. But like, I'd be willing to bet that most of them have a big bag of Bitcoin and they understand what Bitcoin is and they understand that Bitcoin's different. I mean, whether it's like Arthur Hayes will say this all the time. If you read his thing carefully. Yeah. He's like, Satoshi is like the thing, but I'm in it to make money. So I'm doing all this other stuff. So that's fine. So like, but he clearly understands the difference very clearly. And I think most people do. It's just, they don't love to dwell on that very much for obvious reasons. I think if we can get to a point where like it's really clear to the average person that Bitcoin is this unique thing, it's kind of different. It really should be studied on its own in college or university if we still have those. It should be like Bitcoin course, learn about Bitcoin. And then, like to your point on crypto, I mean, to me, these positives would be testnet for Bitcoin in many ways. Like you can do cool stuff without risking the Bitcoin blockchain. I mean, the stablecoins have been a huge improvement in the current system for people. There's no questioning that. That is not something that I think any of us saw, except maybe Nick Carter, who was like super into it. In fact, he was like, stablecoin, listen. And I remember doing this paper for Cato.
John Pfeffer was quite early to stablecoins, by the way.
Pfeffer was also very early. But I remember doing this paper for Cato 4 years ago. And I think stablecoins had like a total market cap of like, I don't know when it was, maybe it was longer than that. But I think they had a total market cap of, what is it today? Like 160 billion or something like that. We're somewhere around there. So at the time it was like 5 billion. And Nick was like, I think it's going to get to 50 billion. And I was like, that seems crazy. Obviously he was right. So, I mean, there's this need they're filling. They're basically like euro dollars you can have in your pocket. They're just offshore dollars that anybody can have. And it's like a natural outgrowth of the system. And it's really useful for people. And I don't question that at all. But what I would point out is that their utility is directly tied to the lack of KYC in using them. So it's more of a regulatory arbitrage thing.
Yeah.
In some ways. And we'll see where that goes. I mean, right now you're seeing a new little, ironically, under the Trump administration, you may see this come to a head where, you've got like onshore stablecoin retailers who may want to, or issuers who may want a KYC in some way. And then you have the offshore ones. And I think you're going to have the onshore ones try to argue to the Trump administration that the offshore ones are bad news. And we're going to see who wins out. It's going to be really interesting to watch. But I certainly don't think they're going to play this role forever. I do think that the state, kind of closes that loophole at some point. And then what do we do? Right. So I think, that's kind of what I've thought about a lot. But, clearly there's utilities and use cases, but, it's hard to shake the fact that out of the non-Bitcoin, non-stablecoin crypto world, like, obviously the biggest utility has been to scam people and to rug people, like, obviously, like, without question. So that's just a hard thing to shake. And I think it's better just to be conservative and not mess around and just stay humble and stack sats and focus on making Bitcoin better and focus on fixing the money as opposed to making the money. And, I think all the things sort of fall into place later. I think there's a burgeoning area of freedom tech. And it's interesting because a lot of people will say, well, you like ecash. Why don't you like other tokens? And there's actually a lot of really interesting nuanced reasons there. But for whatever reason, it's just harder to kind of manipulate ecash. Like and we don't really know because not that many people use it, but it's kind of harder to, it's just a little bit less scammy. Like if you actually think about technology, like just the way it works and how it works, I would encourage people to dive into it. It's like, it's just going to be a little tougher. Like clearly you can rug somebody if you start a mint, but there's just way less incentive to just like go create a bunch of ecash. Like,
like Cashew isn't launching a token. I think they did actually do like some little nuts thing or something, but that wasn't like a token. You know what I mean? There's not.
For sure. There's no people in the space.
Yeah, exactly. So like ecash people aren't,
right, but that's cultural.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yes. And so I'm agreeing with you. Like ecash people aren't like launching a security token or whatever that is at some point in the future going to, derive cash flows from the, transaction. Like that's not how it works, right? Like at least not for the time being. So I would generally agree. And, the maxi projects, if you will, right? Like the more Bitcoin maxi projects, maybe they haven't been insane VC investments, but there's a reason for that, right? They're not like highly extractive. They're not launching tokens. Like it's just been a different cultural thing. So I am
there's some exceptions, I would say. No, but look, I mean, the broader freedom tech thing that we're working on, like ecash is a way to address a lot of Bitcoin's shortcomings through incredibly private, fast, super cheap transactions. There are other complementary technologies. And I think that's the word, complementary. Like, is it complementing what Bitcoin is doing or not, right? And Nostr is amazing. Like, I really feel like there's like no crypto people on Nostr at all. I understand that. I think that's going to change at some point. But when you start to realize how amazing Nostr is, where you have this public-private key pair and you can control your followers, you can control your identity. It has a native currency that's not your attention, which is the current internet's native currency is attention. It's Bitcoin. And you can have full control over what you see. You can have any algorithm you want. You can choose. You can move from client to client. If you don't like the current client, your stuff comes with you. I think once people start to understand this, it's going to be so powerful. And the speed of development on Nostr is insane because it's not Bitcoin. It doesn't matter if you fuck it up. Like people are just launching what are called NIPs, Nostr Improvement Protocols, left and right. And there's so much interplay between Bitcoin, Nostr, Lightning, ecash, and then AI agents. I mean, these AI agents, like what do people think is going to happen eventually? Like, are AI agents going to want to be paid in Tron or stablecoins? Or no, they're going to want to be paid in Bitcoin, the native currency of the internet. So it's like, we're kind of headed in that direction. And I'm just excited for more crypto people to contribute to Bitcoin. I think that's a nice way to maybe get to somewhat of a conclusion here is like, yes, I'm an ardent Bitcoin supporter. I'm pretty critical of token projects for different reasons, mainly because I've seen so many people get burned on them. I understand if I'm a little harsh on that. I also think that the way they're created is not ideal for a lot of different reasons. And I think Bitcoin is human rights activist money for all of the reasons in terms of how it was created, how it's designed, what it does. But I would love to see, and I'm so excited to see more crypto people come into Bitcoin. We've done some things with Starkware. We did a few years ago, we teamed up with Starkware to do this roll-ups research project. We're going to do more with Starkware soon. I think they're awesome, and they're going to bring a lot of amazing talent to Bitcoin. I think that so many designers and UX people and engineers that are working in crypto have so much to contribute to Bitcoin. I'm so excited for them to come in and help. I think that if you did like a Time magazine poll in 2050 of the most important people who've contributed to Bitcoin, I think we've only had 2, 3, 4 of them that we know about today. I think the other 6 or 7 are still to come. They aren't in Bitcoin yet. They're going to come in and bring their ideas. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm really happy to do whatever I can to try to engage and see what folks in the crypto community can bring to Bitcoin. I think it's very exciting, in an authentic way. Not this sort of like L2 Bitcoin season. No. Like the real deal, right? So I think that that's something I'm very, very passionate about.
Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. Also, you've written 1 or 2 books.
So I co-authored the Little Bitcoin book 5 years ago, and that's done pretty well. It's gone around the world. It's been fun. And then I've written 2 books on my own. One is Check Your Financial Privilege, which is the kind of stories of Bitcoin adoption from around the world. And then one is Hidden Repression, which is kind of a historical look at what the IMF and World Bank are, why they were created, and what they do, and and why I think Bitcoin really is going to disrupt that in a big way. And so folks can check those out. And we have all the things we do at HRF, at least at hrf.org/financial freedom. You can see like all the different programs and activities we run. But I think regardless of what you're doing in the crypto industry, it's not a bad thing if more and more people are involved in Bitcoin. That's for sure. Yeah. It's kind of like the lowest common denominator at this point, I think. I think there was a moment where it was like people were like, screw Bitcoin, let's leave it behind. I think people are realizing that that's not going to be the case, and that Bitcoin is going to be at least part of the future for whatever they're doing. And I'm glad to see that. And again, I think we're going to bring in a lot of cool energy to Bitcoin through that.
Awesome. All right, Alex, great work out there. Keep it up. Thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.